This is a beautiful Sunday, May 21st, here in near beautiful downtown Vista. And I had started to write a letter to you at different times that would kind of express some of my thoughts as related to various things that I'd like you to know and be aware of. Some you already are, but if after my death that you have questions about something, at least there'd be a little bit of a recorded message of it, whether it be written or recorded. And I'm sure that a lot of the things that I say now, should I live on to be a ripe old age of something beyond the 62-year mark, that we'll want to change for one reason or another. Either there will be new thoughts as it relates to what we would have in the will, or maybe burial plans, or monetary things. Different things will change in value, of course. But I want you all to be aware of several things. First of them probably be as it relates to the administrators of our wills. We have just recently completed having our wills redone in California, and we are sending copies of these to Nancy and to Jim and to Mary. And I don't particularly like the wording as it relates to California wills versus what we had in Phoenix. So there's several things in there that I want to explain. And when the original wills were written in Arizona, we were going to have the Bank of Arizona to be the administrator. There's one of the banks in there, I forget which one. And then we put an amendment on there where, after we had moved to California, that we really didn't want the Bank of Arizona to be involved with it, that we wanted to update it. And we had designated Jim and Nance to be the administrators. And of course this we discussed with you when you were all out here at Christmas a couple of years ago. And since that time our thinking has changed into where we think really the three older ones should be the administrators, that is Nancy and Jim and Mary. And the reason being that there would be a third opinion should there be just Nance and Jim, and they would have a position on something that they didn't want to give or take on, and that there would be a third party, of course, to help administer wisely and properly. But the way the California will reads is not really our intent, and we questioned this with the people that wrote it, and where it implies that Nancy shall be the administrator, and then if she should be dead or something, that Jim, and so on down to Mary. Our intent is not that, however. Our intent is that all three of you act together collectively to be the administrators. And as California law goes, what would be required, Nancy, is that you would appoint Jim and Mary as co-executors of the will. And that is your right. As I say, we had it done, we went down to pick it up, and when we read that paragraph, we wanted it redone, and we came back and it was the same way, and that's the way they explained it to us, which doesn't make all that much sense, but anyway, that's the way it is. So we do feel that you three older ones would be well, and I want to leave a copy of our Arizona will with one of you, and in this case I'll send it with Nancy, so that you would have the benefit of our thinking at that time, and you'd have our benefit of the thinking on the update of that will. But really there's nothing binding in the Arizona will. The only thing that's binding really is the California will, and it's an extremely simple document, as you will see as time goes on. And as I say, we are sending copies of that to Nancy and Jim and Mary, and the originals are going to be in our lockbox at the bank, and we also will have one copy here in the house as it relates to the will. So I don't know if there's anything unanswered in that. The one thing that I wanted to try to get on tape is the coverage of some of the things as it relates to what we call personal effects that are going to be extremely hard to divide, I think, amongst you children, because we don't know exactly what some of you consider to be an extremely valuable thing as far as you're concerned, versus one of your other children maybe not place any value whatsoever upon a given object or something. But the one thing that I do feel is that things that each of you gave us as a gift at maybe a Christmas or a Father's Day or a Mother's Day or something of that nature should be returned to you. And as I look around, I look up at the picture, for example, that John gave us, that a friend of his painted, and naturally I would think that should go on back to John. Or I looked just in back of me at the desk that Jim made for me while we were still in Wisconsin. And if Jim would want the desk, certainly, of course, I would think that he should have it along with the chair, the things that you might say that go with the desk. And but the things that I really don't know how. Incidentally, Mother didn't want to get on this because she felt that it would not, that there was going to be so many changes made in it someday that she couldn't really make up her mind at this time about what she wanted to say. So I'm doing this alone, and if later on, or if I die or something, if she wants to write or change or do anything, that'll be her privilege, of course. But there are things that mean a great deal to me. For example, the relic of St. Dominic that I got from my sister, my aunt, I should say, and my godmother, Sister Seraphine, and also the Rosary that she gave me prior to her death. Those are things that are of great sentimental value to me, for example, that I wouldn't know really which one of you children would look upon it as also something of value. There's absolutely no monetary value to it, and it could well be that the sentimental value to some would mean zilch, and the sentimental value to somebody else would be quite great. So I'm really not prepared and don't know how to tell you. I think when all of you children are together, let's say after both of us would be dead, and anything that would be left that Mother or I hadn't given you, or should we die in a common tragedy, that if you're together, that you could express your own opinions as it relates to what you would like to have, whether it be sentimental value or monetary value. Mother has, of course, some jewelry, and I have some jewelry, and things of that nature that we wouldn't want to really see thrown into a garage sale type of a thing, so that you could liquidate all that stuff for cash and then divide the cash. You can use your own judgment as it relates to some of the other things that would be sold off and then divided. For example, maybe an automobile or household goods of some kind, whether it be furniture or TVs or radio or whatever it might be. But you all have enough sense to know and appreciate that not everybody is going to get exactly everything that they so desired to have, because there's going to be several of you that may want the same thing. And all we can do is ask that you use good judgment, and hopefully that there won't be any hard or bitter feelings amongst you that one of you got something and the other didn't get anything that you wanted. It's happened in many, many families. Fortunately, it did not happen to me, but it did happen to your mother. She was promised many things by her mother upon her mother's death that she never got. They went to other members of the family, but all those things are really not all that important. They hurt a little bit and they sting, but life goes on and so forth. Another thing that I want to talk to you a little bit about is the funeral arrangements. I'm sending copies of our what's known as the pre-need funeral arrangements, and well, I have a very definite opinion of my own as it relates to disposition of my body. Your mother may well change hers, because even though she's made the arrangements at this time for cremation, she doesn't really believe in it, I guess, but she sort of going along with what I want for my own. But I'm sending copies of that, or have 10 copies made. The funeral parlor, Allen Brothers Mortuary here in Vista, made copies for all of you. And I've explained, I guess, my opinion at different times to some of you children as to why I think cremation is the route to go, and I'll just touch on it briefly again, because Carrie asked me just a few weeks ago, where we were discussing, and she thought it was terribly unfair, so forth, for me to feel that way, and I went on to explain it to her, and I guess she, I don't know really how she feels, but I think another probably 50 years from now, 90% of all deaths will probably wind up in a cremation. I think a funeral, as we know it today, is a totally unnecessary expense. And again, Mother and some of the others have felt that the only reason I chose cremation is to save money. But as I told her, and I've told a couple of you maybe, that is a very definite part of the reason. But I would hope that you'd be old enough and big enough to understand that any money that is saved won't do me one speck of good. And I'm making sure that at least a big part of the money that will be saved of cremation versus the other type of the funeral arrangements will go to where I want it to go, and that's to some of the charities that I feel are worthwhile, and some of that money has already been sent, and before this calendar year is out, there will be considerably more of it sent. And so I just feel that while there's as many starving children and many sick children and many cold and underprivileged children, maybe educational, or those that don't get to ever really know God or have a missionary talk to them are much more important. I could use my money more wisely in helping them out than I could in buying a hunk of granite with my name on it and buying a piece of ground that I could, or that somebody could put a casket down into a vault. I have very strong convictions that the spirit leaves the body, and the body is nothing but a temple for the Holy Spirit while we are here on this beautiful earth that God gave us, and that upon death the spirit goes to God and the body goes back to the ashes and dust as He said it would. And to go through all the huge big wailing parties and all the rest, spend all the flowers and have few limousines running around and that type of a thing is kind of a meaningless thing as far as I'm concerned. What is meaningful is the living children of God, and to try to make sure that they get something. So that is really briefly what I have in mind as it relates to my cremation. Beyond that, of course, if I were to go the conventional route, I wouldn't really know where somebody may want to leave my mortal remains, whether it be in Vista or wherever the hell we may happen to be. I don't know, but I would see no great need to ship them someplace. I would just put them wherever, whether it be out under the avocado trees or whatever, but I guess you have to go into a blessed piece of ground or something, so that would kind of eliminate that. Another thing that is not really in our will that I think should be mentioned, but it's along the same lines, is that once the value of the estate has been determined, the personal effects divided the way that you'd want them, and the rest liquidated into cash and whatever stocks or bonds or so forth that there may be. When there is a determination as to the cash amount left, and after all the taxes are paid, I would like for you to take something right off of the top, whether it be a 10% or a 15% or something, and give it to some charities of your choosing. And the reason I leave it that way, I'll leave it with a little word of advice, however, is being your choosing, but I would hope that you would select charities where there is a much greater need than, let's say, our very lovely parish here in Vista, St. Francis. We donate regularly to that parish because we use all the parish facilities and we feel that everything has to be maintained. But I would hasten to assure you that it's not one of my favorite charities. Again, there's people who are starving and dying each day because lack of food or lack of shelter or lack of medicine, and they are in much more need than is, let's say, a new statue or a new building or new automobiles or something for the parish here or any of our nearby parishes or something of that nature. Of course, there are a lot of very worthwhile causes right within our continental 48 states or the detached 50. There are people that are starving here too, and there's people that are very sick and lonely. If one of your favorite charities happens to be a strong need that is developed, and you can justify in your own mind that it's the will of God that you help them out. Maybe it's a next door neighbor. You have to be the judge of that. I trust you to, as a group and as individuals, to act prudently and wisely. All of the stocks and bonds that we have, and God only knows what there may be, there will be buying and selling of these various things from time to time, mortgages and whatever. But the stocks and bonds that we have are in what's known as street name, which is familiar to some of you. But they're currently being held by the Crowell Weedon Company in Oceanside. And a fellow by the name of Bill Esterline is the man who we've been dealing with over there. But again, upon my death or common death, that mother will, if mother's available, she'll either continue to leave them in street name or maybe liquidate them all and put them into some kind of a trust fund or something. That's hard to tell what she may advise. One thing that I wouldn't, of course, want to happen is that some stockbroker be given the right to buy and sell stocks for the estate as he so chooses. I wouldn't want any part of that, because he works on a commission and he gets commission for everything he buys or sells. And I'm sure that maybe the finest guy in the world, but it's a little hard to resist temptation when there's money to be made by buying and selling, and if you're in control of quite some of money. Many large estates have wasted away in that type of a process, so certainly I wouldn't want anything like that to happen. By the same token, it's going to be your money. Again, I'm always assuming things of today. Maybe by the time we're dead, maybe we won't really have an estate. Maybe we'll wind up owing people some money for something, and all that you would inherit is some debt. I hope that doesn't happen, but many things are possible. None of us know what's ahead of us down the line. But should you inherit some money, as I was going to start to say, I would, my old ashes might twirl around in a dust storm or something if I thought you would just take it and blow it on one big flame of some kind, maybe a new sports car, or 1/10 of a down payment on a new sports car, or something. I would like to see it go for the betterment of your individual life or your family's life. Maybe some much needed furniture, maybe some much needed medical or dental work that you required, or maybe some new furniture, maybe paying up some debts that you acquired that you were unfortunate enough not to have been able to repay properly or something. But again, we all have a different idea of what money is. Mother and I have done without many things in our lives in order to make sure that we would, or try to make sure that we would have a buck or two when we got to this point in our life, and with God's blessings and with some personal giving up things of a personal nature on her part and my part, we've managed to have a few bucks. So we could have gone the route of joining country clubs, which I like to play golf, and I always thought it'd be nice to join a country club and be able to play and entertain and the rest. And Well, there's many things that we'd have liked throughout our life. Newer and better automobiles, steak a little more often than hamburger, and traveling a little more. Thank God we have been pretty fortunate in doing a lot of traveling compared to what some people have done. And maybe the boats or the cabin cruisers or the cruises, Mediterranean cruises, a lot of things that money could have been used for our personal benefits or personal enjoyment, I should say, that we chose to give up in order to have something for the future. And having a heart attack as I did in January, of course, makes you think that future is awfully doggone close. And it is close. I'll be 62 and ready for Social Security on my next birthday, which is only, 8 months away, maybe 9 months away. Not even sure as of this printing, of course, whether or not how long I'll be with the Ardman Company, but it won't be beyond the middle of next calendar year. And as I say, probably sometime next year we'd probably be updating a tape like this, because I intend also on this tape to make a few copies. One for at least each of you three older ones, and one for ourselves here, so that we could listen to it and see what we had said and see what we may want to update or change or whatever as time goes on. I gotta look up here for a minute and see how we're doing on time. As I was thinking back over what I said here, maybe there's one point that should be clarified to you administrators as it relates to giving of some money from the estate to charity after all the taxes and stuff were paid. I don't know what the law is. Maybe it could be that you could give some money to charity prior to taxation. Or maybe some of the things that are within the house that would not be meaningful to some of you could be appraised at a fairly high value and be given to charity prior to the government getting their sticky old paws on whatever part of it they would get, and believe me, they'll get everything that they can, both state and federal. So avoid as much taxes as you could. Speaking of that, I've had different thoughts and plans at different times as to how to try to avoid some of those taxes, and I know there are ways that I could do it. I have thought of, for example, buying some $1,000 bonds, 10 of them, all in the same company, and of course all at the same price, and give them to you as a gift, and just ask that you keep them in your name, but return to us while we're living the interest that those bonds would accumulate to be part of our income, and then of course upon our death that the interest payments that you would get would be for yourself, and if you wanted to sell the bond or cash the bond in at that time or keep it, that would be individual choices. As I'm sure there's 10 of you, some of you would certainly want to sell it right away, and others would want to maintain it. And but that can get to be kind of a sticky thing. As I say, we have a close family, thank God, but it's always possible that down the road a piece, for one reason or another, a family wouldn't be quite as close, and that I may be developing a new set of problems if I go that route. So it's something that I'm certainly going to think more about, and don't be too surprised by what I do. As I say, if the money is going to be lost in some manner, I'd rather it be lost to you guys than to the governing agencies, the state or the federal agency that will collect the taxes. But I'll have to get some advice on that as to, again, how much is allowable as a gift and so forth. I just happened to read in last night. I guess it wasn't all that important anyway. But I went back and listened to that first side, and there was just one thought went through my mind that I probably didn't cover very well, and I didn't go really to look at the papers. But should I die someplace a fair distance away from Vista? We had talked to the funeral director in this event what happens, and of course the recommendation is that a cremation be arranged for in that particular city or town where I would be, and then the ashes themselves sent back to the mortuary here in Vista for the disposition and scattering at the seat. And also, as it relates to that, of course, there would be a church service at St. Francis, and for family and friends or whatever. And also, just you might say as a side comment, that with one of the things that Mother was very fearful of was, or not necessarily fearful of, but concerned about, is scattering the ashes at sea. That she says you'd never want to go in that ocean again. But of course, my answer to that would be that I wouldn't know how a person could possibly eat something that was grown in the ground, or walk on the ground, or dig in the ground, or anything else with the ground where the body was stuck 6 feet under. What's the difference of whether the ashes would be disposed of one place or the other? But that's nothing. So what further I really want to comment on is trying to, if at all possible, keep the strong family unity type of a thing that we do have. Some of us, I think, the most natural thing in the world, some of us are probably a little closer and communicate a little easier than do others. And why, it's very difficult to tell or say, but it does happen. And when there's going to be this many people involved, God has given us all our own mind and our own heart and our own emotions, and we're to control them as best we can. But the very center of God's plan, of course, is family. And hopefully that all of you children, during all of your lives, and your children and your children's children and the rest, will stay united and knowing and understanding of each other's and one another's problems. Very, very necessary. And And I think first just to really know God's plan. It's probably hard to understand, but very, very basic, is that He just puts us on earth here to be an image of Him and to rejoin Him someday and hopefully live with Him in eternity in the spirit world. So just a minute. Okay, I'm going to use up the balance of this side of the tape probably and get into a little bit of what you guys would call roots, I guess, as it relates to myself. Some of you, the older ones, have seen some things and heard some things that some of you younger ones haven't, and it's impossible really to know who's done what and all that. So I just thought I'd kind of go back in history a little bit as it relates to myself and tell you a little bit more about who I am and what I believe in and where it all began and all the rest. And of course, as you all know, I was born in Graceville, Minnesota, a small town out in the west central part of the state, on February 13th in 1917. And that was right at World War I time. And at that time I was the fourth of the 4 children that my dad and mother had. And in those days my dad was commonly known as a druggist. He was, after that time, they became registered pharmacists, and they were able to dole out prescribed medicines. But sometime prior to that, I don't know really just where the history, I've never delved into it, but if you wanted to open a drugstore and were a halfway decent businessman, you could just open a drugstore and buy and sell medicines. And so my dad, while he did have some schooling, he never was a registered pharmacist, and as time went on, when that became a requirement, he lost the drugstore. I don't think he was really an astute businessman, because I can remember as a kid looking at some of the old records that came out of the drugstore and seeing that many of the people that he had extended credit to never did pay him. And I think my dad was probably one of the most easygoing guys in the world as it relates to that. He felt if somebody couldn't pay him, that they just couldn't, that's all. But as I say, it was his downfall as far as business venture goes. His parents homesteaded out near Barrie, Minnesota, which was only about 8 or 9 miles out of Graceville. And they homesteaded originally on 80 acres, and they subsequently acquired through purchase and the rest. They had a little over a section of land, and then also some of the other Trainor relatives had property within the area. And my dad at one time had a separate quarter section. And let's say, I don't know all the history of that, but he had lost his quarter along with it, and maybe some of it was in medical bills. Land itself was not all that valuable at that time, because it's all what was known as dry farming. If you got the proper amount of moisture in the winter and summer to grow a crop, you could harvest it and sell it and go on. But if you didn't have the proper elements of rain and so forth, you lost it all. But getting back to myself for the moment, well, I should stay on Dad for a minute. Again, when I was talking about looking at some of his old records, I can remember in our old house in Graceville, down in the basement, up on one of the walls. It was just a wall that was dug out of dirt, and up on the shelf underneath the house were some of these records. They were old medicine bottles and so forth that had Trainor Pharmacy on it and J.P. Trainor Drugstore. I often wish, now of course, I wish that we had kept some of those things. It probably would have been somewhat of a chore to lug them around with us or keep them all these years, but it would be nice to have some of that stuff out of the past. At least a couple of those old bottles. They would have somewhat of a monetary value, but beyond that they'd have a great sentimental value to us, but they're gone. Anyway, my dad married Isabel Stevens, and that Stevens family was French, and they were from Beardsley. And how and where they met and all the rest, I don't know, but my mother was a nurse, and she was quite ill with a bronchial condition, and of course she died with asthma and got pneumonia with an asthmatic condition, and the combination of the two without some of the drugs that we have today to eliminate that stuff, you might say overnight. She died of it during the winter, and I have memories of her, but not very many. I remember of her, for example, the night they took her down to the hospital. We lived about 2 blocks away from the hospital, being a small town. But it was during a blizzard, and there was none of the cars could move, and nobody in town anyway had the horses and sled that they could get out and get through the blizzard down to the hospital. So 6 fellows in town just bundled themselves up as best they could, and they put Mother on a stretcher and wrapped her up as warmly as they possibly could, and then carried her through the snow and the blizzard down to the hospital. But, of course, she never made it out of that illness. She died, and because, again, they didn't have the medicines and the things that we have today to correct that type of a thing. But after her death, then we stayed, all the poor kids stayed at St. Mary's. They had a school there, and the sisters' home. They had a boarding school. So we stayed there in order to get in our schooling. And then it wasn't too long after that, of course, that Dad married my present mother. Her name was Kitty Reardon, Catherine Reardon. And she went on to be an exceptionally good mother to us, and all of you children, of course, remember her, which is nice, because at least you would have known one of your grandmas. Some of you never knew your grandpa, because he died long before some of you were born. That is your Grandpa Trainor. And Mother will probably get to you, give you a little more detail of her roots and family too, but so I'll just confine this to myself and my family at the present time. But the early years of my life with Dad and Mother were, as you look back, kind of uneventful. We were never wealthy, because Dad had whatever money he had and accumulated, he had lost pretty much by the time I became of age of reason. We did have an old automobile that was known as the Baby Grand Chevrolet, and I think it was about a 1916 or 17 model. And of course we still had it, as I say, when I remembered. It had the wooden spokes, and I remember my dad on a Sunday afternoon would go out and throw a couple of buckets of water onto each wheel, and that would kind of expand the wood a little bit, make it swell up a little bit, so as you drove it, it wouldn't creak and squeak quite as much the dried wood rubbing against each other. And it was strictly a summertime automobile, and the first sign of winter it would go down into the garage and be put up on jacks and stay there till the next spring. It was an open touring car, and we did have some side curtains for it, but there was none of the antifreezes that we know of today, the permanent antifreeze and so forth. So there was alcohol at that time, and alcohol could be put in the radiators mixed with water, but it in itself had such a low boiling point that often it was a very dangerous substance to try to use as an antifreeze. The temporary type of an antifreeze that was used in those days was what we call distillate. It's kerosene. The bad part about it, of course, is that it would deteriorate the rubber hoses, and rubber hoses at that time were far from being good ones. So many times if in an emergency somebody had to get their car out for something, they would pour some distillate into the radiator, and then they would take a couple of buckets of hot water, boiling water, off of the stove and go down. They'd pour it over the carburation end with the intake manifold and as much of the engine as they could, and then crank like a son of a gun and hope the thing would start. So it was, you can read about it, of course, in the papers and stuff as you go along, or the history books, but those were just accepted ways of life. The main method of transportation during the winter was by horse and sled, or buggy if there was no snow, and of course the trains. We did have, we were living in a community in Graceville where we did have two trains, one going north and south and another going east and west. And most all the towns around us were not like that. They had just either east-west or north and south service. So Graceville was kind of the hub of that little area, and we were fortunate to have the two trains. And the trains, of course, served very good purpose. They would haul the cattle to market, and they would haul the grain to market, and they would haul any of the equipment and supplies into the villages and cities, farm machinery or automobiles or whatever it might happen to be, to the local merchants for resale. Well, I'm just skipping all over here, which probably is nonsensical, but as they say, one thing, it kind of reminds me of another. I was always called upon most every summer, it seems, to be the altar boy at our local parish there, Holy Rosary Church. And I guess, I don't recall that I volunteered that much, but I guess Mother volunteered my services more than anybody, so it seemed like almost all summer, every summer, I was wound up as being the altar boy available to serve Mass for our priest. In the summertime, he would have the morning Mass in what we called the big church, and in the wintertime it was always in the sacristy. They would only heat the church Sunday morning, and then just briefly and not very well, because again those were hard times, and there wasn't that much money to heat a church or anything. I recall, of course, speaking of church, we had the pulpit, and it was always my dad's job to push the pulpit out more toward the center of the church, and then the priest would get up in the pulpit to deliver the gospel and say the gospel and read the gospel and give a sermon. And then Dad would push the thing back, and then he always took up the collection on one side of the church, and somebody else would take it up on the other side. We had a nice little church for our size town. A big part of the town itself was Catholic, and the original start of the town itself was all Catholic. It was a little Irish settlement, group of Irish immigrants brought over from Ireland by Archbishop Grace, who was bishop of the diocese out of St. Paul, for our parish. Incidentally, speaking of that, this is the year of the 100th. Graceville is 100 years old this year, and Mother and I are going back at the end of June, in the early part of July, to celebrate that. And we 4 children, that is my 2 brothers and sisters, along with their wives and so forth, will have sort of our own separate reunion, because we're all going to be there, and we're kind of looking forward to it, to be all together, and we'll pray God that we'll all remain healthy enough to make it. It's in the near future now, so 100 years, it's really not all that long when you think about it. I still remember our 50-year celebration and remember it quite well, and I still carry a scar on my right shin bones as a result of that particular celebration. What would I have been? I would have been 11 years old, wouldn't I? Yeah. Playing up around the pavilion area that they were building, I fell onto a cross timber and just took all the skin right off my shin bone. About 2 inches long and about 1 inch wide, and believe me, it stung and smarted. And so I was somewhat of a cripple during that celebration, but that stuff like that didn't seem to slow you down when you were a kid. Very, very interesting. They had brought, I can remember so well, they had a merry-go-round and a couple of the rides, I'm sure that were very, very tame by comparison to the rides that you see at the carnival shows today. But they brought over quite a few of the Indians from the Sisseton, South Dakota reservation to help supply some of the background. And of course, some of these Indians that they brought over were the original Sioux from the Sioux tribe from that area. And I can remember so well one old squaw, one old lady, and our police chief, a fellow by the name of our policeman, a fellow by the name of Jack Littleton, just insisted upon her getting on this merry-go-round. And not only did she hardly ever see anything like that in her life, but she was extremely afraid of it. But they had all been drinking some, so they got her on the thing anyway, and she became quite ill. And then I don't know if there was much regret, but I remember just as an 11-year-old at that time, it was kind of turned me off, and I felt bad that they literally forced her on that against her will and made her sick. And often thought about that. People do things sometimes, they mean well, but it turns out to be kind of cruel. But I can remember my dad, of course, and mother telling of things maybe just 25 years earlier or 30 years earlier that they remember so well. And like at that time, Graceville would have only been 10, 12, 15, 20 years old. How different families and different people came and went, and some died. And we had a nice time in our little old town. Then my high school, I went to St. Mary's for the first 6 years, of my grade school, and at that time it was found necessary to put tuition in at St. Mary's to try to help them pay their way, and my dad couldn't afford tuition, so we had to swing over to the public school. And so starting the 7th grade, I went to public school through those last 2 grades in the 4 years of high school. But we had a nice high school. It was built just prior to the Depression. Matter of fact, I think it was built in 1928 or 29, so I can remember the school that it replaced, and it was one of those typical big square, 2-story, high ceiling things. Some of you have seen the new, what we call the new high school, the high school at Graceville now, and it's not a bad place. They've expanded it considerably since we went there, however. And when Nancy was back with us for the funeral, my mother, I think then we stopped and went through the high school as it is today and recalled some of the things that went on back then. But our education was pretty good. At least they taught us how to read and write and do arithmetic, and that's something that not very many of the schools are doing today. My graduating class of high school, as I told several of you, there was only 13 of us in the graduating class. I'll see some of them now at the reunion, and it'll be interesting to see some of those kids. And when I got out of high school, of course, there was absolutely nothing to do as it relates to earning a living or making any money. In a town like Graceville, the population, I think, was around 950, and I guess still is around that. But there was obviously no opportunity of any kind. But the family farm, that is, the farm that my dad and his brothers and sisters owned, was still in existence, and my Aunt Tess, who was pretty much the administrator of the farm, thought possibly she could work it out, and did, to buy some machinery on time if my brother Morris and I would go out there and farm it. And under her guidance and with her help financially, we got a new tractor and a plow and a cultivator and a drag. And that was all. So we proceeded to farm a little over the section of land, and that hit us right during the drought. The most severe part of the drought, the Dust Bowl, as you'll hear it referred to in history, was on at that time. That was in 33, 34, 35, those years. We worked from sun up to sundown. At that time there wasn't the lights on the tractors and so forth that there is today, but Morris and I would change shifts and we would just keep working and working and working, because with just the one tractor and that much acreage, in order to get things done, that's what you had to do. So we planted, plowed everything that had to be plowed. We did get some help in drilling the grain because we didn't have a grain drill and we didn't have a corn planter. So one of the neighbors did the planting for us after we did the plowing and the dragging, and then we did all the cultivating, and of course we had to have a thrashing crew to come in to thrash, except that we really didn't need them the first year because everything burned up. There was nothing left, just burned crisp. It was like you look out across the California hills, and when we're in August here, and it's just brown as a berry. Everything was burned crisp. The next year we were fortunate to have had a type of wheat known as Thatcher wheat that was a drought resistant, and we did have enough seed to plant 40 acres of that, and that was harvested, and we sold the seed for enough to just break even, pay our aunt back for the money that was due on the equipment, and pay for the original seed. And I felt extremely fortunate in being able to do that, and that was as much farming as I wanted. So I should cut in there probably a little bit before. One of the reasons we went on the farm too is both my brother Morris and John had gone over to the Agricultural Extension University at Morris, Minnesota, which is about 21 miles away. And they, I don't remember just what they had hoped to major in at that time, but it was a 2-year college, so John went through 2 years of it, and Morris went through 1. But there was absolutely no money for me to go on to any type of education. So, as I said, we tried this farming thing, and we just hit very, very bad time as it relates to weather, things that were beyond our control. But it left a lasting image on me that no place that I want to pursue farming as a living. If you do get a good crop, the prices are depressed. If you don't have a good crop, the prices are high, and you have nothing to sell. You're always at somebody else's mercy when you're farming. You know, things have changed somewhat since, but not all that much. So it's a big gamble, and I maintained even way back then, even though I didn't know what Las Vegas really was. I decided if I was going to gamble that much, that I'd rather do it in a card game or on a slot machine or something. And speaking of slot machines, that was my first time, I guess, ever to really learn a lesson in gambling. Slot machines were legal all across the country, of course, at that time. And in our town, we had a little restaurant, and he had a penny slot machine in there. And I had a couple of pennies. And I